Hello guys, in this example we can define a custom hook. So far we have used a number of hooks from React, right? Just like use state, use callback, use effect and use memo. Just like we have used a number of hooks from React. In this example we are going to create our own hooks. So what is basically hook? Hooks basically a normal function. If you want to share a logic between two functions, we will create a common function so that two functions can use that same logic. So when we can use a hook, when we want to share a logic between two JavaScript function, we extract into third function. So if you have a function, we want to use that logic in different function, we will extract into a third function. This will create as a function and this will called as a hook. Now what we can do in this example, we are going to create a custom hook where we can use in multiple places. Okay, now we can jump into the example. What we are going to do, we are already created a project npx using the command npx react native init. You can just use the command npx react native init custom hook. So I am going to build that project. Here you can just see clear, and I am going to open my emulator. You can just open the emulator. Yes, it's opening our emulator. Now meanwhile we can build our application. We can just clear all the previous project. We can just remove the previous project. Yes, now we are going. Now we can just build the application using the command npx react native init, npx react native run android, right? So this will build our application in our simulator or emulator, whatever we have. So we can just wait for a moment. Here you can see the application is building. Now the next thing is we can just open our code in our VS Code, just remove all the previous code. Yes. Here you can just add the folder to workspace. I am using custom hook which we have created recently. Yes. Now we can just remove the previous project. Fine. So meanwhile we can also remove the previous code or the code generated by React Native. We can just remove this one. We can just remove the node, and also this section we can just remove. Fine. Now what we can do, we can just remove this one as well. Fine. We just created a class component, functional component. Now what we can do, we can just remove all this code. We can just have a view style flex equal to 1, background color we can just give right now a green. Okay, then we can just close this one and remove all the by default code which is generated by React Native. We can remove all this by default code and also the styles which we have created by React Native. Now we can just check whether the application is built. Yes, it has to be builded. So we can just wait for a moment. Now what we are going to do here in this project, in this example, we are going to create a Axios hook where we can pass the method and the URL and it will give all the response unit. Just like a React query, we can create a Axios hook, right? So we can just wait to project to be completed. Yes, the project is installing. Yes, it's successfully installed and loading the project. So bundler is loading. Yes. So it's load. You can see the bundler is load. Now what I am going to do, I am going to explain this example with the hook and without the hook. Okay, so firstly what I am going to do, I am going to hit an API. We can just hold JSON placeholder API. So you can just search for JSON placeholder API. Here you can see the fake APIs. We can just check the post one, right? So here is the post one API. We can just hit this API on here, right? So For hitting an API, we need Axios or fetch, right? Here I am going to use my Axios, or what I am going to do, I am going to create my Axios. So we can just install Axios for now. So yarn add Axios. Also you can do the same thing with the fetch as well, but here I am going to use Axios example for more my convenience. Now I am going to import Axios from Axios. Okay, now in this use effect we have to eat the API, right? So what I am going to do, I am just creating one method use effect. Okay, so in the use effect, what I am going to do here, just hitting the API, we can make this as an API call const API call. Here we are going to hit the API, right? So what we can do, we can just create Axios. Also we can just set the base URL, right? So we can just set the base URL here, Axios. So if you do not have the knowledge of how to set API, just go to the Axios documentation. Here you can see Axios documentation. Go to the Axios doc. Now here you can see Axios instance and everything. I am not going to hit the ACI. I am just setting the headers only. So we can just Axios base URL. Okay, so here you can see Axios default base URL. So I am just copying this one, Axios default base URL. Here I am just pasting Axios base default base URL. Here my base URL is type JSON placeholder.type.com, right? So we can just paste it here. Now we have set our placeholder. Now the next thing is we need to hit the API, right? So we can hit the API using Axios. So we can just have const response. What I am going to do, I am going to hit the API Axios. Here how can hit the API, it's a get API, right? So we can just pass it Axios get, or if we are using already used the base URL, so we can just have Axios dot request. So request, we can have an object, right? So we can just pass method. This is a get API. So we have already have Axios. If you want to check the documentation, you can just check Axios request. Now go to the request method, how to use API, Axios make API. Now here you can see install API. We can just get headers and parameter we can just pass, right? So we can just have Axios dot request post API or XAPI. Yes. So we can just check out the method Axios dot request. So we can just go here. Here you can see create is there, Axios read only, methods are request. So in the request what we need, so we need configuration, whatever the value Axios configuration. Here URL is needed, method needed, base URL. So method we have passed, and the next thing is URL. So we can just pass URL. So the base URL we have already added. The next thing is we need post, right? So we can just add post / post, right? Now the next thing is we need to make this as a synchronous function. We can just make this as a synchronous, and what we can do, we can just console the response, right? Console log response. Here you can just console the response for now. Now we can just call this API here, API call, right? So we can just check our console, just go here, debug, fine. Now here you can see, just check out the documentation. We can just go to the console and reload the function once more. Yes, here you can see the response is coming. We are getting the data, right? Now what we can do, we can just have some loaders and data setting, right? So we can just have const loader set loader, and then we can just make a use state for setting the value for loader. We can just have set use state false, initial value will be false. Then we can just have data setting, data set data. What we can do, use state, right? So use state, Now inside here what I am going to do here, what I am setting that empty array or empty string also we can just set for now. Then what we can do, there will be error object, right? Error set error, right? Now what we can do, use state, we can just have a empty string, right? Now the next thing is we need to set this old value, right? So here initially what we can do, we need to set this as true. Then whenever the response when the response is coming, or if you received the response, what we can do, we can make set loader. If the response is there, if response, you can just check the status. What is the status is coming? 200. If the response status is 200, what we can do, response status 200. Then what we can do, we can make this as false, right? So we can just have response set loader false, and then data we can just have response dot, the data is coming on here, right? So we can just have data. Fine. If it is not, in the else case, what we can do, we can just make an error, something went wrong, right? Something went wrong. Or we can also put this in a try catch, okay, so that any error come, we can just catch on the try catch. We can just have try catch error, we can have a try catch here. If any error come, we can just have something went wrong again on the catch, right? Now we can just remove this one. We can just console the values, or console.log data, then error, then loading, right? So we can just have a loader. Now if it can be treated as state. Now if I just refresh, let's see what's happened. What we have done, we have declared 3 variable, right, for loader, data, set error, right? And we call the API, we set all the values, right? We set all the values whatever we are receiving. So it should be response, not response. You can just have spell correction here. Now if I just go to here, let's see what happened. If I can just refresh, see my initial state will be empty, right? So initial case true if before it is loading. After loading we will receive all the values here, then we will make false. Then we don't have any errors right now, right? So we can just have all this on my render. What we can do, if loading, what we can do, if loader is true, we can just return activity indicator, right? Return a view style flex equal to 1, align item center, justify content center. I can just close this one here and have an activity indicator, right? So we can just have an activity indicator. Size we can just give large, color we can just give black for now. Then what you can do, we can just close this one. Fine. So we have closed this one. We have already, we try to make sure that activities indicator is added. Then what we can do here, we can just create a flat list with the data, if the data is coming correctly. So we can just make this closed here. Yes. Now flat list. So data will be on the data object, right? Now render item will be, we can just make the text rendering here, item here. We can just have a text here, text style, font size, we can have a 20, color we can have a black, and then we can have the text item. Now the data, if you look into the data, we can see the data is coming like a title and a description, right? We can have the title here, item dot title. Okay, now we have to close this flat list. We can just close the flat list, right? So we also need to clear the background color so that green does not appear anymore. Now if I just refresh, let's see what's happened here, right? Now we can just make this as a card. Okay, view style, padding 20, and a border width to border color black. Fine, then we can just make this as a card. Fine, let's see. Here activity indicator is coming. Yes, you can see every card is coming. We can also have border width reduced to 1 and margin as 5. Now that each card will be separated from each other, you can see here each card is there. We can have a flat list. Now we can add one more thing. If error is coming, if anything error comes, if error, right, so we can just have an error. Now if error is coming, what we can do, we can just return this method with a text input. We can just have a text and the style color as red. We can just give a color test and we can just render the error, whatever the error is coming, if any error comes, right? So we have handled the all case, initial loading case, error case. Now after receiving the data, we are receiving the data, right? Now if you look into the next example, if you are going to the API detail of each post, right? If I want to get the post detail of 1, right? So if I want to get the detail of post 1, so he can just pass the post ID. If I click the item here, right, I can just go to the post detail by fetching the API, right? In that case, we are going to replicate this old state once more, right? All the logic we are going to repeat, right, for another API calling, right? In the post detail API, we are going to replicate all this. This is for getting all the posts, right? Now if you are creating a next screen, right, if you are creating a next screen and you are trying to fetch the API detail, you have to write all this code once again, because you need a loader for fetching the each post detail, you need a data variable for storing the detail, you need a error variable for storing the error method, right? So we are going to replicate all this method again in the post detail page, right? So this is causing a rewriting every time we have to write this code, right? Now here it is come, we can make this as an Axios use hook, right? Now I am going to replace the, or I am going to place this all code into my hook. We can see how we can create a hook using Axios. Clear? Now we can jump into Axios hook. Now I am going to create a hook for this one, right? First of all, what I have to do, just create a folder. Here we can just create a folder src. Then src, inside this src we can just have one more folder, hooks, right? So inside hooks, I am going to create one file, Axios hook, or just create Axios hook. We can just have a file name Axios hook. Now inside this one, what I am going to do, I am just going to import use state and then useEffect from React. Okay, then here we are going to use all our Axios dealing, right? So for that one, what I am going to do now, here these two lines I am going to create here Axios default URL, right? So the next thing is we need to make this all logic, right? So for that one, we can create a hook. So hook is basically a function, right? So what we can do, export const use Axios, we can just have Axios fetch, or use Axios hook, we can just have a use Axios fetch by the name. Now we have a parameter Axios, we can just pass Axios params. Why I am passing the params, right? Here you can see we are sending some parameter values, right? Method, post. Now in the post screen, URL is post, right? So in the post screen, in this screen it is post, but the next screen it will be URL / post1, right? And if you are updating the data, what will be the method? It will be put. So these are changeable, right? So it will be changed according to different pages. Now we can make this as a parameter, so that whenever we are using this hook, we can just pass this as an object, right? So we cannot make this dependency here, right? So that's why I am making as a param. Now the next thing is we need three important, we can just remove this old code. We need three important variables. Here you can just add that one. We need a loader one, we need a data storing one, then we need a error storing use state, right? Now the next thing is we are going to create a method hitting the API, right? So we can just have const fetch data, and this will be asynchronous method, right? So this will be an asynchronous method we can just have here, or same thing we can just use API call. No issue, API call we can just use as it before, right? So we can just use API call. Now inside this one, what I am going to do, I am going to make the same logic whatever we have done it, right? So we can just have a try, we can just copy this one, copy paste it, right? Now the next thing is we need to call this one, right? So we can just have a useEffect here, useEffect. So useEffect will call when there is a mounting, right? So we can just have a mounting function where our useEffect will be calling, right? So it will call from here. Now we can just have a API call. Fine. Now the one thing we have missed here, we don't have these values, right? Get, we cannot make this hard coded, right? So it will vary according to pages. So we can just delete this one and have this Axios params here. Clear? So we make it as a general function where we can use in multiple pages or multiple places. What only we need to pass? We need to pass only method and the URL. Clear? Now what we can next do, we need to return these values, right? We can have a return, and this return, what we are returning, we are returning the loading and the data and the error method also we are returning. Now the next thing is we can just have also, we can return API call if needed. Fine, right? Clear? So we have declared all the API logic inside Axios hook API, right? Now we can just use this hook in our page, right? For that one, what we need to do, we need to import our hook, right? So we can just go into the app.js, clear all this code from here. So we don't want to replicate this one, we can just import our hook, use Axios fetch hook from where it's from, inside src hooks Axios hook, right? Now what we need, we can just call this function, right? We can just call this function, we can just have a console as well, right? And we can just return for now, so that any error does not come, because it will error if you didn't come and have a return null here, it will throw an error for loader and the data, right? Currently we can just check what the value is coming on this one. Okay, so we can just have console log. Now we need to pass the parameter, right? So we can have just as before method, so we can just pass a method get, and then we can have a URL, right? So we can have a URL. Inside the URL we are just passing /post, right? So we can just have /post and we can just close. Now what we need, we can just check what the values is returning by this hook, right? We can just close, open this, and then what we can do, we can just refresh. Here you can see the loader is coming, the data is coming, the error is coming, right? So we have all the method. Now if you want to call the API also, you can just call the API. Currently we don't have any usage of this API code, we can just remove. We only need the loader, the data, the error, right? So we can just have a distraction here, right? Object distraction, const data loader, then we can have the error using the method use Axios fetch method. It is coming from here, right? So you can just use Axios fetch method. Now just return this one and just remove this console. We can just have all this console, right? So now it should run as it before, because we are getting the data, we are getting the loader, we are getting the runner. Now if I'll just See, the loader is coming, the data is coming. We have managed all our API code using this single method, right? Single line of code. With this single line of code, we have managed all our API code. Now, if I want to hit the detail page, if I want to go for a detail page, what I have to only do, just change the URL. Now, if I just look into the data, you can see the data is coming very properly. We don't want to replicate this old logic in our post detail page. Here you can just console. If I just go here and refresh it, here you can see the post detail is coming. See, single object, where previous one we have received array of object. So here you can see array of object is coming. If you pass one, it will return the single object. So now this will treat as a hook. We can use this logic in multiple pages. Now if you are going to create a post detail page, just only one API calling handling, right? Just add this line and make this URL changes. Clear? Now if you are going to create a post, what you have to do, just make this as post method. Every logic will be same. We have a data, we have a loader function, we have an error, right? So everything will be same, only you need to change these dynamic values. Clear? So this is all about how we can create a custom hook which we can replace or which we can use in multiple pages. Clear? Now we can jump into the next slide.